Hello everyone, it's Mr. E here, and I'd like to talk today about the Arbites, but more specifically, I'd like to talk about Fatshark and their business strategy or their strategy going forward, what my hopes are for them, and where I see the community's greatest criticisms, and which ones I think ring true and which ones are a little more hollow. What I have to back me up on this is a very detailed document put together by a fan of the channel and of course a fan of Darktide. This guy also happens to be some sort of data analyst, sort of a consulting guru on the side, or maybe that's probably his main thing, right? I'm not saying it. I guess playing Darktide and watching YouTube is probably his side thing, and the consulting is probably his main thing. But needless to say, this guy is a super huge nerd in the best possible way. He knows a lot about Darktide, and he's done a lot of data analysis and some real meta-analysis on what the criticisms that players and the community have of Fatshark as a development company are. And so I want to go over this today, and I want to sort of put the cultural context to it, because numbers can tell us a lot, but we also need to understand the history of Fatshark and their process, and also like what was going on within the game at the same time. And he's a player and I'm a player, so we have sort of similar takes, but I think this will really tie together a discussion about what my hopes for Fatshark are going forward, because it's no secret that I love Darktide, right? It's also no secret that I'm not 100% on board with the way that Fatshark manages their game. I want more out of it than perhaps it's meant to be. I know that they have expressed in the past that if they could just get people to tune in for every update, that's good for them. And I think that this game is so close. It's burgeoning on such a great potential of being a game that people want to play year-round. But what we're seeing over and over again is a mass exodus of players and an influx of players and an exodus of players. And the Arbites is another in that cycle where we had so many players and we bled them off again. And I wonder if there's some takeaways from this article here and from some analysis from this person and myself that we could do that might be constructive criticism for them going forward. So let's go ahead and start tucking into this article. The first thing that he talks about here is looking at the daily player counts. So before we start looking at some of this data analysis, I think it's really important to mention where this data is coming from. Of course, it's being grabbed from Steam, because Steam is one of the only public-facing platforms that allows you to see concurrent user data. And so it's really, really important for judging the relevancy and the successfulness and like sort of the livelihood of any given game. And so this is only going to be Steam data, which means that we have no idea what the console players are doing, as far as what ratio of console players we have to Steam players. I don't know, really. I'd have to assume it's probably like 1/3 of players. It might even be like 1/2. I don't really know, because a lot of times those console players are not playing in Havoc, which is where I primarily play my games. So let's assume it's like 1/3 of players, but that's really not important. All that's important here is that we can assume that these trends that hold true for Steam player data probably hold true for those console players as well. So with that being said, let's look at the four categories, the four time spans that an analyst is identifying here. Pre-announcement, announcement to release, post-launch hype, and then post-hype. And so over here in pre-announcement era, I think the important thing to note about this is that we had information that there was like that teaser, right? There was hype within the community. But since this hype was only within the community, I know a lot of you guys that watch my content and stuff were appraised of this. I talked about it a lot. People were hyped about it in here. Oh my God, what is this going to be? But it didn't reach outside of the community. So how likely were you as a player who, maybe you installed Darktide 2 years ago, you played it on launch, it sucked, and you uninstalled it and you didn't think about it. How likely are you to go on the Steam page and see if there's any updates, like a teaser or whatever? How likely are you to tune into the Fatshark YouTube channel and catch their teaser there? Not very likely, right? And so I think that is a big takeaway here, is that like teasers like that, if they're going to do these teasers, they should be they need to be trying to look for bigger stages, ways to get that in front of people's eyes. Fortunately for them, they had a very obvious way to get things in front of people's eyes with Skulls. Warhammer Skulls happened on the 22nd, which represents this huge spike here. And obviously, this is a couplefold. One, and probably the more important of the two factors, which is causing this big spike, this more than doubling in concurrent player counts, is that's a big convention. A lot of people were watching, and a lot of people saw it either like live or on VOD, and were like, "Oh my gosh, I haven't thought about Darktide in a while. Let's go play that right now." Because probably a lot of things have been updated since a lot of people have last touched this game. And look at the retention. Honestly, like we had 10,000 players for a full 2 weeks, and then it dropped down to about 7,000 players. But that is like double what we had in the time span before, which means that you have a significantly boosted player retention, and this is without any the new content that's coming, without the RBDs actually being launched. So there is stuff here. There is stuff in Darktide that if people could be shown that it is significantly improved over where it started, that they would be interested in playing. And I think that's the really big takeaway that I want to drive home today, is that there are just a handful of issues that keep people falling off of this game, but they could really lock in this game at a higher, stabilized player count for longer spans of time if these issues were addressed. And we'll get to those issues at the end here. Then we had the release date, which peaked at like 43K. This is why I think that there were probably very close to what that infographic that I put out yesterday said, where like 400,000-ish characters created. That means that we had 40+ thousand people like at one time. And then over the course of the day, all around the world, there's people waking up and getting it then. Not everybody takes off work to play it on the day or like day of, but some people do. And not everybody's going to get up at 12 midnight Eastern Standard Time or whenever it were launched in order to play it right then and there. So this was representing just the Steam players and just from one little snippet of time. So you have to extrapolate that to how did it do over the course of the next day or the next day or two, and then add in all the console players as well. So I think it's very reasonable that it did add up to probably in the 300 to 400,000 range of total sales. Coming down this way, we have a really, really steep drop off, as they say in their analysis here. This, this is to be expected, right? This is an exponential drop-off when that post-novelty or post-launch novelty wears off. You're going to lose people because, first of all, everyone's scheduling their lives around this huge happening in Darktide for this period right here. But then it starts dropping off because people have to go back to their work and their lives. They've played the game, they've seen the class. Okay, that's cool. I'll play it this weekend when I get some more time. And so yeah, that's what they end up doing is okay, I'll come back to this in a day or two, but now that I've played it a little bit. And that's what causes the drop off. But look, the more important thing is this post-hype period. The 4 weeks, starting at 4 weeks after release out here. Look at where we are now. This is roughly now. This is like a week ago or like 2 weeks ago when this analysis was done. But look at where they are now compared to where they were back here. So we're a pretty long distance away from RBD's launch, and there's no contact from Fatshark, right? They're on vacation in this time period here. So this is like a new stabilized high for the community in this period, which is so much better than we were beforehand, which to me bodes really well, because this means that there is enough content and the game is sticky enough that players that pick it up, even without Fatshark being directly involved, want to keep playing. There's stuff here now that players who aren't currently playing will want to pick up and make it their main game, or make it a game they come back to regularly. And that's the players that Fatshark really needs to cater to. That's the players that we really want to have. And I know that Fatshark, and maybe I've said this already in the video, but I know that Fatshark talks about how they're okay with players only checking in for major updates and playing then, and that's cool and great. But where they're really going to, butter their bread is on these players who play every weekend or every day. Like, you can get more of these players. They are out there, but the the olive branch needs to be extended. We need to be doing stuff to cater to these players a little bit more than we currently are. So coming down here, a bunch of statistics gobbledygook that I don't understand, but as he says, there's a slower second phase that indicates a residual audience that is willing to stay engaged, right? And I'm certain that many of you guys in the community watching my content now are players who probably picked this game back up after RBD's launch and are really like feeling that engagement now. And you're finding lots of reasons to play, and that's awesome, right? That is what we want, is players who are like, oh, I can't believe this. I didn't know this game was like as good as it is. If you can maintain, as he says down here, if you can maintain even part of this uplift, if you can keep this this sort of structure going, it could generate much more revenue for them, which in turn could lead to increases in development and more of this. So the goal is to scale up this, right? You started here with this really low line. You got a big peak because of some advertising and because of some in-game events and the hype for this launch. Then you got a massive peak on the launch, and then you trended down, but we're so much higher than we started. Now, if we started here, the next peak could be up here, right? If we repeat this same process with magnitudes of scale, you know, there is certainly a ceiling for how many players will ever play a Darktide, but you could peak even higher with the next release because there's more players who are aware, there's more players who are looking for Darktide content, and therefore there's more mouths to spread the word of mouth. You could make the next pop even bigger. It's a sort of the similar way to like how YouTube videos work, right? Where like your first video that pops off draws a lot of views to your channel, then those views launch you into an even bigger pop for your next really big video. And then the question is asked, can this growth in concurrent player activity be sustained over time, or will it inevitably decline until the next major update? I think that if we look at our Steam charts now, let's see here. Oh, we can't pull it up on here, but we got 6,000 in game on today, a random ass Wednesday at 11:19 in the afternoon. You know, that's a lot better than we were, and we haven't had any updates from Fatshark in like a month and a half. So I think we're in a pretty reasonable holding pattern. It's definitely a lot better than it was. And I think this reflects that the game is in a much better state than a lot of players were praised to pre the RBD's launch. So overall, good job. Like we did good. We got a lot of new players in. The game is good enough that's holding those players. But what can we do to retain these players, and what is causing these players to fall off? And this is where we're going to transition to the second phase of this, which is looking at user sentiments. So this is a meta-analysis of comments of user reviews that is from the Steam platform, and it's from 13,205 game reviews on Steam, and it's utilizing I can't remember exactly what AI model is being utilized here. It says it later down, but he's utilizing AI here to scrub these comments and determine what their major defining characteristic is, what they're talking about in the comment, whether it's positive or negative. And this is the ups and downs, or like, you know, the positive and negative, but then he's going to further break it down into what is the comment actually about? What are the negative comments all about? What are the positive comments all about? And look at the, so this is leading up to the release. Here is the week of release, and here is since the release. So let's try to kind of extrapolate, right? What we're seeing here is that this was really high, right? We had a roughly 60, dropping a little bit to 50% approval rating of the game. These are like Steam reviews, right? But you have to remember that people that review games on Steam, like I've never gone in and reviewed a game positively. I don't think. I'm not motivated to do that. I feel like there's probably much more likely to see negative reviews on Steam because people are pissed and they have no other way of expressing it. So I feel like the trend is going to be negative for a lot of these Steam reviews. So the fact that we had 60% out here was good, but I can't remember exactly where here he actually says it, but these numbers in terms of gross number of reviews are much lower. There's very few reviews coming in this time span, but once we get to this era here, the just pre-release and the post-release era, the overall number of reviews are massively inflated by comparison, which I don't have the data for that, but I'd love to see it. But what we can see here is there is a really precipitous drop-off the week before launch, and I'm going to put a little bit of context to this. I know what this is about. This is about the announcement of the pricing. Because we knew that it was going to be $11.99, but the week before launch they announced the deluxe edition, and that being $18.99. I am certain that this review bombing was as a result of that they were saying, oh my fucking god, as if $12 wasn't bad enough, now they're asking for $19. The outrage, and they just review bombed the shit out of it. But on release week, it jumped up to 54% pretty immediately. That's nice. Then it trended down, right? This has got to be due to the number of bugs that existed within RBDs and then other issues, as we'll see down here later. So let's go ahead and look at what the discussion topics. These are the frequently discussed topics that occurred within Steam reviews. First of all, general feedback. No really real specifics in terms of what general feedback means, but these are just saying like, hey, this game is really good. It has like good art direction, or like this game is fun, or this game it doesn't have enough content, or something like that's what falls into here. Performance and stability is making up 2200. This is the vast majority, right? What's this say? 45.5% of all reviews is this, and this one skews positive. So 70% of the general comments are positive, and only 19.2% of these are negative. So generally, on the whole, when people were making comments about liking the game, they had a general positive feeling about it. But when we get into performance and stability, this one, the 2200 numbers here, which is where is the number on it? It's 17% of all reviews. It's very, very negative, right? Only 10% of people are going to say something positive about this. I mean, I can't even imagine a person in the world who would leave a positive comment about how good this game runs, because we know it's a really, really difficult game to run. But almost 80% of players saying this is a negative experience for them. So I think this should jump out to Fatshark as like, this is an area to target, right? When you're getting negative comments about the performance and stability, I see a lot of these comments from like Xbox players and stuff on my videos talking about like, hey, yeah, like this game just crashes for me all the fucking time right now. That's a real buzzkill. And so that makes a lot of sense that that's a big negative one. We move on to monetization and pricing, which is negative leaning. Well, I mean, pretty damn negative, right? 23.3% positive and almost 70% negative, a net negative 45.4 percentage points here. This has got to be with how the cost of the DLC, and probably some more stuff about the premium store and having stuff ready to go. Yeah, so the overall sentiment is how polarizing these are, right? As he says down here, a large positive leaning bucket like the general feedback can be a stabilizer, because every 2 out of every 3, or 50% of all comments are just general feedback, and 70% of those comments are generally positive, right? And only like 15% are negative. But when you have the other 50% of comments that are all pretty starkly negative, then it starts to bend the other way. So all Fatshark needs to do is really work to address these issues, and not all of them are perfectly addressable, but certainly things like performance and stability could be something they work on addressing, even if it's not the most flashy thing. If you cut out this category here, if this was a more or less non-issue, and you shrunk this portion of the pie down to something like way down here, because it's just not a thing that people talk about with the game, then that would really boost your overall sentiment and your overall review scores, which review scores do affect sales of games. Okay, so let's come all the way down here and look at player suggestions and talk about these are a grouping of reviews that contain suggestions for Fatshark, what they should be doing with their direction. And so this is a really, really important data set for Fatshark to look at and be aware of, because this is where players want the game to go. This is where players, I mean, they obviously aren't going to add Space Marines or anything, which is probably something that players are demanding somewhere in this data set. But a lot of this stuff is very reminiscent, what we just saw up here. So first of all, most of these are clearly negative, right? These are detractor comments who are saying like, hey, you don't have enough of this. This game is great, but it doesn't have enough content, or yada, yada, yada. The concentration of areas here, as he says, about 30% of all of these suggestions are content and feature expansion. So there is a hunger here for more content. Oh, I just realized you can hover over it and see it. But yeah, we have roughly 10% of these that are kind of neutral, 26% that are positive, and 63% that are negative. So we can see that not having enough content or features or there's stuff that people crave here and that they're not quite getting. And I would guess that a lot of this is down to like maps and weapons, especially like promised weapons like the veteran. I know that's a big sore spot for a lot of players. Then we come down to these next categories. Again, bug fixes and stabilities. Bug fixes and stability, only 10% positive and over 80% negative, just like we had up here. This is just people complaining about this performance and stability. We need to fix bugs. Bug fixes, troubleshooting, getting the game stable and running on all platforms with like good quality is a really, really big demand from players. It's a big driver of negative sentiment in the reviews. Then we have another pretty starkly negative group here with general gameplay and miscellaneous. Just saying like, this game is boring or whatever. I don't know what would fall in here, but yeah, these are also a big deficit. And then he also says we have a medium-sized category down here that all of these are starkly in deficit as well. So we have balance and difficulty tuning. This is almost definitely players complaining either about how ridiculous Havoc is or whatever, or that RBDs makes the game way too easy, one or the other. We are going to have performance and optimization, right? This game is terribly optimized and runs really horribly on even roughly high-end computers. Monetization and pricing adjustments, again, some more bleed over from that first group where we're talking about probably the premium shop, which has always been a sore spot for players, as well as the pricing, the release of that deluxe edition DLC, which a lot of players did not like. And then social and matchmaking is very negative, 80% negative, right? I have to imagine this is to do with the Party Finder being a system that sucks, and also Quick Play not being very informational and putting you with like just nonsense players half the time, or like players leaving or griefing, all that sort of stuff. So you can see that like we do have we have some positive sentiment in terms of general feedback, but when it gets down to suggestions, players are negative. Players feel very motivated to tell Fatshark what they should be doing with their game. And a lot of these reviews are all about leaving those suggestions and telling them what they need to do. So let's wrap up our discussion of the comments and the reviews by talking about why these are so negative. There's lots of reasons why they're negative. I think, as I said earlier, it's going to be a system that does tend to the more negative comments being the ones that are left, because how often are you leaving a positive review on your Amazon page when you get a product that you like? You're probably dissatisfied with the product, right? You're just going about your daily day. But if the product is really shit and you don't have any recourse for it, you'll go to that Amazon page and you'll leave a 1-star review. So I think there's a negative bent there. But also, as he says, there is a negative bias here, because many of these suggested improvements, which the suggested improvements columns, this graph here, is very negative on the net whole. That's because you can leave more than one suggestion, and that gets split into multiple things. So the same comment could have left a general or content and feature expansion negative comment, could have left a performance and optimization comment. It could have left a general gameplay comment. You could have been like, this game doesn't have enough maps, it's fucking buggy and it's crashing all the time, and it sucks. Uninstalling, right? That could be your negative comment. Versus when you're leaving a positive comment, there's usually like one positive thing. In my experience, when I'm leaving a positive comment about a game, there's like one thing I really like. Dude, this soundtrack is banging. Positive comment falls into one category, right? So we're gonna see more, more negative, because those negative comments, so those negative suggestions can fall into multiple buckets. So that does contribute some to that overall negativity, but I don't want to discount that negativity at all, because I see it in my comments too. Players aren't happy about the direction and the choices that Fatshark make, and I feel that too, because I am also a player, and I also get frustrated, especially as a person who tries to make content off of this game, because it's not updated enough for my taste. So we come down here to the discussion conclusion, where I think our analyst here has some really, really good takeaways for Fatshark, some good summative points that I'm going to piggyback on. And you can't argue with me in the comments, because I'm right, because there's graphs and stuff here. So it's statistically proven that I'm right. But first of all, we have to look at the statistical success of the DLC. Even if they didn't retain the most players, they got a big pop of players, they sold a lot of DLCs, and they have a much higher concurrent player average after the fact, even a month on, than they did before. And we're in a very, deep lull in terms of connectivity with the developers and the community. Nothing is really happening right now. So for it to be retaining 6,000 players at a random Wednesday afternoon, I think that's pretty good as compared to the 3,000 we had before. Could it be higher? Yes. And how do we keep it higher? Well, that is a question for the second topic here, which is the overall review sentiment. It's really, really negative. So how do we address this? Well, we need to know what the reviews are about, as we saw up there. I think the most important thing to focus on here is these suggestion-bearing reviews. These are the players who have an idea and are actually putting something out there about how they would like to see the game improved. And while not every suggestion that players put out is going to be good, and probably most are absolutely garbage, there are a good amount here that we know we could take something from, and that could show Fatshark where they need to look next for generally improving the player experience. Because if you make the player experience good, I think there's a lot of good gameplay, and it's definitely an addicting game to play, but I feel like it's the connective tissue, right? It's the lack of updates. It's the monetization. It's well, it used to be the crafting, right? But it's all that stuff in between, the connectivity issues, the glitches. Those are the sort of things that get people to uninstall, but the game itself, the core gameplay loop, is really, really good. So let's look at what people are demanding, and we'll see if we can maybe think about Fatshark improving on some of this stuff. The first one is content and features expansion. I think this is always just going to be a drum that people are beating. It's not the most negative thing in the world. It's like 40% negative, which isn't the worst category, but content and feature expansion just says like, hey, we were promised more classes than this by now. We were promised weapons for veteran last year. We need new maps. It's been like a year since any new maps. Those are all valid criticisms, and I think that, this is the category that I think probably needs the least focus on, because obviously they're going to be releasing new content. That's sort of what they're doing as developers, is they're releasing new content. But the second category is bug fixes and stability. This is, I know, a huge, huge, huge problem for a ton of players. It's the number one defeating thing, is if you just can't play a game because it's constantly crashing for you. And I know there's been big swaths of time where Xbox players have basically not been able to play this game at all. It's been rendered inoperable by one bug or another, and I just think that is such a shame, because that's when you're going to uninstall a game and not going to look back, when your game can't even run. I'll put up with a lot of bullshit in a game. I won't put up with a game that is not functional. General gameplay and miscellaneous, we can't really extract anything out of this, and I think that's really A lot of these smaller categories are too general for me to figure out what sort of comment it would come from. But as he says down here, these comments, these negative reviews, they are both a challenge and an opportunity for Fatshark, right? The fact that people are negative on this game, but we can see a big pop in players when good content is released, means that players are fundamentally interested in playing the game, that the game is fundamentally good and has some player draw, but there needs to be a way to shift this sentiment. And as he says here, although the DLC succeeded in driving engagement and sustaining elevated player counts, the tone of discussion became more critical. So how do we plan out our communication strategy and prioritize the right fixes and enhancements to alleviate that issue? How do we stop the conversation from turning critical in the days afterwards, and in turn extend that honeymoon period, so that instead of going out and saying like, oh, I bought this DLC and now I found out this game sucks, you're like, oh my god, my friends should buy this DLC too and they should play this game. Okay, so what he says is they need to demonstrate responsiveness to the most frequently voiced concerns, which means you need to be hitting those bug fixes all the freaking time, performance optimization, monetization fairness, and gameplay balance. I think a lot of this would come down to gameplay balance. I can't really speak to. That's a much more long-term thing. But the performance optimization is definitely one that you want to be hitting every single patch. You want to be showing that, hey, we're improving this feature. It's like almost comical with Fatshark at this point, where they released like FSR, 4.1 or whatever it's called, and it immediately had issues and didn't work at all. It's like a comedy of errors with the performance in this game, and that is the sort of thing that players are really picking on. Is the performance stuff. And then monetization fairness, it's always going to be that cash shop. I know that they probably can't do anything about it, but the cash shop is going to be that endless drum that people will beat in, to antagonize the game and point out that it's greedy or yada yada yada. I think that if you're going to have the cash shop, you just got to take down the chin, but then do everything you can on the side of the players to give them fair opportunities to earn Aquilas. I think if you gave players, and I know this might be landing on completely deaf ears, this might be completely banned by Games Workshop or Tencent, whoever's making these decisions, but if you gave players a time investing activity that allowed them to earn Aquilas, I bet you a ton of these complaints would dry up, right? I don't see anybody complaining about platinum in Warframe. It's because you can grind out stuff that you can sell for a ton of fucking platinum. But the fact that the only way to acquire these premium cosmetics in the game, with how ridiculously many of them there are, is by cold hard cash, instead of spending your time with the game, which is something they should also value, is unfortunate. So, as he says, for Fatshark, the data suggests a sustainable growth path if these pain points are addressed without diluting the core gameplay experience that drives positive sentiment, which is easy enough to do, right? The core gameplay experience has always been good for Darktide, right? Even way back in the day when there was way less weapons and classes and the talent trees sucked and all that stuff, the core gameplay experience of this game is good. It's getting players to the actual game and getting them to enjoy the game itself and not the crafting and the the mandatory meta and the party finder and all that shit that's around it that makes it just toxic to deal with. The crashes, like that stuff, the supporting web to the actual gameplay itself needs to be the focus behind the scenes, and that can't take priority over content development either, because as you can see up here, content and feature expansion is our number one requested and demanded thing. So the quarterly updates and probably even more needs to keep happening, but behind the scenes there needs to be bug fixes and stability tuning. There needs to be fixes to all these connective systems. They did this with the last one. Like they released the Arbites, which is a big juicy content chunk that people really, really wanted, and they did an overhaul to the new player experience. I think if we can continue on that trend of having a big main dish for each DLC or for each update, where it's like, okay, here's 4 new maps, like a big chunk of content, and also we're fixing the balance issues with this and this and this on the side. That is a way to advance forward, because you're only strengthening that core of the game, and you're erasing some more of these issues that are on the sides of the battlefield that are causing these negative sentiments to grow. And so in marketing terms, it says, if you make future releases both content rich and community responsive, it could strengthen player loyalty, and neutral and dissatisfied players could turn into advocates, and which will improve the long-term viability of the title. So that means, to me, basically what I just said, but I'll say it again, which is, every release from here on out, every quarterly release needs to go big. We cannot go back to the days of yore, a year or two ago, where an update was like, yay, we have a pennant system now. That's not enough anymore. Every update needs to be big in the terms of like, okay, it's bringing a whole new class, or like this many new maps and weapons. And we're fixing this issue and this issue and this issue that you guys have been talking about. Really, really be tuned in to what the community is complaining about. Like right now, if I were to do my next, if I were to be Fatshark and do for what they're going to do for fall, right? My number one thing I would put out is I would put out new maps. I would introduce like 1 new enemy, just like a little teaser. Maybe they'll do more enemies later on in the year. And then I would do a rework to the Zealot, or rework to a class, just to get that out of the way, and do balance fixes on weapons. Right, there you go. That would be a great set of content. There's some core content for players who don't care about balance and shit to sink their teeth in and play, but then for the players who are more engaged and were potentially the ones that were leaving those negative comments and saying, this class fucking sucks compared to this class, and these weapons are useless. Now they can't say that anymore because they've been changed, right? So those players are now made either into advocates, or they've been made neutral and pacified. So you're erasing that negative sentiment while you are improving the core of the game, and that's going to draw more players and keep those players happier for longer. So it's striking to see, as he says down here, it's striking to see how the data reveals a more complex reality beneath personal experience, which is, yeah, this is true, right? I fully enjoyed my time. I still enjoy my time playing Darktide, and the community, as I experienced it, was super, super hype. There was a ton of hype and positivity about the RBD's launch. But when you look at the actual reviews and the sentiment of players who are leaving reviews, it's very negative. It's very complex. There's a lot of suggestions. There's clearly a lot of directions that people are pulling this game to go in the future, which means that there might be a strategic move by passionate players to highlight their priorities rather than outright rejection of the game's value, right? Exactly. It's players who, like, you wouldn't criticize this game. Most people on the forums and stuff, if you're on the Fatshark forums making criticisms of the game, if you're in my comments making criticisms of the game or Fatshark, you aren't making these criticisms. I don't make criticisms of Fatshark or Darktide because I don't like the game and I want to shit on it. I make them because I like this game and I have priorities that I want to see. I want to see the weapons brought more in balance. I want to see that their classes be brought up to where the RPDs and Ogren are, and perhaps see those guys not be so crazy dominant in the meta. Those are the things that I want and that I'm championing for. It's not me being negative about the game, but I do have these things that I want to get across to Fatshark and have them prioritize. And so that is, I think, where a lot of this negativity comes from, is like players being like, do my thing next, because they want the game to be what, good in the way that they see it. So I don't think we can take away that, like, everybody just fucking hates this game, because if you're leaving a comment, it's you care about it in some strange way, right? So so recognizing and responding to this dynamic could be a decisive factor in converting heightened engagement into lasting retention. There are a ton of people out here in the ether that give a ton of shits. They care a lot about Darktide. They care a lot about 40K content and franchises. If you could appeal to those players, if you can start to extend all the branches and give them what they want in some way, shape, or form. If you can bring in, content that is going to grab these guys and pull them in, they can become champions for you. They can become addicted to the game, even if they aren't the most outspoken about their positive experience. But they'll stick around. They'll keep playing. So that is the analysis, guys. I hope you enjoyed this discussion today. This was a long Yaptide, but I thought this was super cool. Clearly, this guy put a ton of work into this. I can't understand all the technical, statistical side of the stuff, but really cool. And it's a thing I've been thinking about, talking about for a while, which is like, yeah, what can Fatshark like stabilize our players at a much higher value? I think they could, right? I think we could have a game that consistently has over 10,000 players, even in off seasons. I mean, when's the last time TF2 got an update, right? But players still play that. Well, I guess it's mostly botted, but like other games, like Left 4 Dead, right? Players play that all year round, but it has no new content or anything. It's moddable. So maybe there's ways that we could do that sort of stuff too for Fatshark or for Darktide and get more juice out of it. Anyway, that's enough rambling for me. I've been Mr. E. Subscribe and all that stuff. Okay, I'll see you soon. Bye.